Hey guys, this is Will with Silver Suspension. We're getting a lot of requests on how to set up spring preload on a divorced shock and spring setup, also known as an OEM-style setup. So today I want to make a little video to help you guys out, walk you through the process. Today we're working on an Audi. Your suspension on your vehicle may look a little different, control arms may be in different places, different style, but for most vehicles this will be the same process. You're still going to end up doing the same exact steps, just maybe in a little bit different locations. First things to cover, on these types of setup, your spring perch is adjustable. That is what dictates your ride height. So basically you're affecting the overall length by bringing the perch up or down. And your shock is also adjustable, but that is only for setting up spring preload and basically putting some pressure on that spring. So when setting these up, my first step is to set the shocks longer than need be. Basically, if it's too short, it's going to limit and make making changes to your spring and height a little bit more difficult. So just set it longer than it needs to be and start playing with the spring perch where it sits on both sides of your rear. You want it to be even, and start lowering the car down, put it on the ground, see how it sits. Once you've got that sorted out and you've got the height you're after, jack the car back up. And since the shocks are set longer than they should be, you'll notice the control arm can droop down. If you follow me in here, you'll notice that since our shock's too long, there's not much pressure on the spring. There's actually a pretty big gap here, and if you grab the spring, you'll notice it has a lot of play. It's really not in there securely. So from here, what we'll want to do, basically you want to aim for about a 1/4 inch of compression or preload on that spring. Some vehicles like a little more, some like a little less, but it's a good general amount. You have kind of two ways to go about this. On some vehicles, you can just adjust the shock length once you find zero preload, which we'll get to in a minute. So we've already seen that we have the gap and too much spring play. So we're going to start adjusting the shock shorter and shorter, and you'll notice that this is bringing the control arm up, bringing the spring up towards its perches. The gap down below is starting to disappear. From your zero preload spot, removed any up and down play, but you're not compressing the spring. You'll shorten the shock a 1/4 inch. That's going to bring the control arm up, compress the spring a little bit, and keep things nice and planted in there. Another option, if you have difficulty figuring out how much you're compressing the spring, easy way to do it is take a tape measure and measure your spring before any compression is on it, and you should find you could have a 6-inch long, 7-inch, 8-inch. But if you're aiming for a 1/4 inch of preload, after you've shortened your shock, you'll find that your 7-inch spring is now, say, 6 3/4. 8-inch spring will be 7 3/4. Just a good visual verification that you have compressed that spring a 1/4 inch. Everything is nice and tight. So from here, you can go ahead and lock everything down. Give it a test drive, make sure there's no odd noises or clunks or bangs, and you should be all set. Now we'll go over some of the more intricate details of preload and divorce setup. You can have too little preload. So if your shock's set too long and you're driving around with no preload, the shock is not compressing that spring at all. So even though, say, the car is on the ground and the weight of the vehicle is compressing the spring and suspension, when you hit a bump, your control arm is going to droop down. And if the shock isn't limiting how far that control arm can drop, your spring can either rattle around and make clunks, or if your shock is so long it droops too much, your spring could even fall out if it's drastic enough. So if you have too much preload, if you've compressed that spring too much, you'll find that ride quality tends to suffer, gets a little bit more harsh, in some cases bouncy even. On top of that, a good way to think about it is if your shock's too short, you're squeezing that spring quite a bit. That spring is constantly trying to push away, and all that force is going into the shock, basically trying to rip the shock apart. So too much preload can definitely be detrimental to the lifespan of your shock, so you don't want too much on there. Another point to make, when you're setting these up, you'll find that most vehicles have a rear sway bar that's connected to both hubs or control arms. If you start adjusting one side more than the other, you might find that the sway bar itself starts to become a limitation and can make making any adjustments harder as you're fighting the tension of the sway bar. So on some vehicles, it's recommended to just go ahead and unbolt the sway bar and links while you're setting this all up, and just make sure to reattach them after you're done. One last thing to mention for you guys, unlike your fronts where your ride height can be changed independently of the spring preload, on these setups, anytime you make a ride height adjustment or move that spring perch, you will need to reset preload and adjust the shock length to match. So that pretty much covers all the basics. If you guys have any other questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us, shoot us an email, give us a call. We'll be happy to work with you and see what we can figure out for you. Besides that, please like and subscribe, and if you have any other video requests, please let us know. Thank you.